Hey, Cypher here. I haven't done a philosophical question in a while, so I figured I'd do that on this episode. So, today we're going to ask, does common sense exist? Now, I'm not talking about how it seems like nobody has common sense anymore, or whatever kind of bull you want to spin on that kind of stuff. I'm talking about, does common sense itself actually exist? See, most people can't even define common sense, and so they will just use it as just kind of an excuse to make logic, and to make it up as they go along. So it's more of like a baser form of logic. But then the question becomes on that, if common sense is something that is just with everyone, and anybody can tap into that since it's common, does that mean that we can all tap into this baser form of logic? And so there's a fairly easy way to figure out whether or not we can all do this. All we have to do is take the most rudimentary logical problems that we can come up with and figure out if we can determine the answers without knowing any previous logic. So for those of you who have taken a logic course before, you might be cheating in this, but you still might be surprised at the result. But then what is making sense if not just applying some base form of logic? Well, the argument here would be that it simply doesn't exist, that we are making it up as we're going along. And that seems to be the case. So I have a very simple proof to show that common sense doesn't really exist. Now, when I'm talking about logic, I'm talking about logic with like capital L, the actual philosophical form of logic. Not just the, hey, I'm being logical kind of logic. I'm talking about the real structure of any given argument, and how something can be valid, invalid, sound, incorrect, all that kind of stuff, all within the very structure and meaning of a given statement. Not just whether or not it seems to be correct or not. So in any logic course, you kind of have to begin with the syllogism. The syllogism is kind of the most rudimentary form of logic, and that's what we're going to be using today. So an example of a syllogism would be, Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. Or, broken down even further, you could say, all A's are B's, all B's are C's, therefore all A's are C's. You see that equation up there? This is the structure of a syllogism. So I'm going to give you 4 examples of syllogisms that will challenge whether or not you can understand them. And I'm going to be using this ABC format. But first you have to understand the concept of soundness and validity. You'll hear people talking about, you have a valid argument, or that's just not sound. But most people don't know what they're talking about when they're using these terms. They're actually logical terms. So validity is whether or not the structure of the argument will yield the therefore. So is it necessary that if all A's are B's and all B's are C's, does it necessarily follow that all A's are C's? Well, in this example, yeah, it's perfectly valid, and in fact it's sound. Now, soundness is whether or not the premises are true, and the argument is valid. If both the premises are true and the argument is valid, then it is necessarily true at the bottom. You are yielded with a new truth, that Socrates is mortal. But here's the rub. Those 4 examples that I told you about earlier, we're going to try to see if you can determine the validity of these things all on your own. So I'm just going to list the examples, and let's see if you can get them all right. I'm guessing probably not. And if you can't get them all right, then that kind of disproves whether or not you have common sense at least. Although I'm arguing that no one really has common sense, it will disprove whether or not you have common sense. Now, pause or skip backwards if you're getting lost on any of this kind of stuff. I mean, this is as basic as you can get when it comes to logic, but this could be a little too complex for you, or I might be saying it a little too fast. So just pause the video or anything like that if you're getting lost. Just remember, this is very basic stuff, so if you are, in fact, getting too completely lost just by what I'm saying, it kind of disproves that common sense exists in the first place, because this is the most rudimentary you can get with logic. And if common sense is logic and you're getting lost with this kind of stuff, there you go. So for the first example, some A's are B's and all B's are C's. Therefore, some A's are C's. You can see the equation right there. Now for example 2, all A's are B's and no B's are C's. Therefore, no A's are C's. Example 3, some A's are B's, no B's are C's, therefore no A's are C's. And in example 4, all A's are B's, some B's are C's, therefore some A's are C's. So you remember what you thought of each one? Because here are the answers. Valid, valid, invalid, invalid. The first two are valid, the second two are invalid. Most of you probably got them wrong. Just by law of probability, you have a 50% chance on each one, and there's 4 of them purposefully done so that it kind of mitigates the possibility of you getting it just by happenstance. But there are a few of you who probably did get it simply through happenstance, not understanding a thing of what was going on. Now, to prove these things as valid or invalid, there's a fairly simple method that involves just making a Venn diagram of the possibilities for the syllogism. Hopefully it'll show up on the corner here when I start talking about each one, but you'll see that it was pretty dang simple, and if you weren't able to guess the validity of this, this does kind of disprove the existence of common sense. So in example 1, we'll see that the very structure forces the therefore part to be true, if the premises are true. You see in the Venn diagram that's showing right there how it's all perfect and everything is correct according to how the structure of the syllogism is? Well, this is kind of how you prove validity. So let's move on to example 2. Now you see how the absolutes force the thing to be correct? This too is a valid syllogism. Now for example 3. You see how it kind of forces 2 separate possible conclusions which both invalidate and validate? Well, with these 2 possibilities, it's invalid because you have to have it forcibly showing the therefore to be true. This isn't something that I'm surprising on you or anything. This was pretty clearly explained with the validity thing, but just how I phrased that sum makes 2 different possible answers, which makes it invalid. As I said before, validity depends on necessity. It has to be true if both the premises are true. And in this case, it's not. There's no argument to be had, it's simple math. Or in reality, it's simple logic. So here is example 4, and you see it has the same problem as example 3. There's no argument to be had, this is invalid. Just plain simple logic. So once again, valid, valid, invalid, invalid. So you might ask, how does this apply to a regular argument? Since Aristotle discovered the syllogism, it's been taught as the most basic form of logic, and you can actually plug many arguments into this structure. It's really simply just replacing words with those A's, B's, and C's. If your argument is valid, and both your premises are true, then the sound answer that it yields is new knowledge. This is how logic works. It's the structure underlying any given argument. And in its most rudimentary form, it's a syllogism. And you can make most common arguments into syllogisms. And with this nifty little trick, you can do real logic, not just what is called common sense, or in reality making it up as you go along. This wasn't to go, you're stupid because you don't have common sense. It's actually to show that common sense doesn't exist in the first place. And we shouldn't rely on a made-up concept to underlie all of our arguments. You now have the capability to argue with logic, at least with syllogisms. And I'd encourage you to go out and find out more. There's plenty out there on finding new ways to learn logic. But next time somebody says, it's just plain common sense, ask them what common sense means. And they'll probably not be able to answer. And if they say, it's simple logic, boy do you have an argument to give them. So, thanks for watching, like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you next time.